Okay, so today on the show, we have Dr. Pat Davidson. You prefer being called Dr. Pat Davidson?
No, just Pat's fine.
Just Pat. Gotcha. Well, Pat, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Definitely have some questions I want to dive in with you on when it comes to hypertrophy. You know, you have your athletic weapon, and I'd love to kind of pick your brain about that. But I think before we really start to dive in, I'd love to hear a little bit more about you, your story. Maybe just give us the quick elevator pitch about who you are.
Sure. Well, I am I have a PhD in exercise physiology, master's in strength and conditioning. I worked as a college professor for 5 years at two different schools. And I came to New York after academia to work for Peak Performance. That business went out of business. And then I've been in New York since then. And it's been like 5.5 years now since Peak went out of business, something like that. It's been a long time. And I've just been my own independent business entity. New York City is a place where there's a lot of independent personal trainers, which is a weird gig. You know, you kind of like, oftentimes rent space in a gym and have your own clients, charge them whatever you want, pay the gym rent. I've just kind of I moved more and more into the educational space and more into like online business space. So these days, like I really am 100% into education with teaching seminars for rethinking the big patterns and online sales with, athletic weapon exercise programming and education through the power hour. And, that's my world now from a business perspective. And so I think that's probably the quick and dirty of my professional story.
I gotcha. Okay. What made you make the transition, I guess, from, academia, being a professor to wanting to just be a coach?
Yeah. I was kind of pushed out. I really didn't fit in very well with the department I was with Springfield College. And I'm not the easiest person to work with. I don't think. Like, I can be pretty difficult. Like, I'm going to do things the way I'm going to do them. And there's not much in terms of other people's input that's going to really change what I'm going to do. It's funny, like we were talking a little bit before we started recording where I was sort of saying that I like working around other people. I like interaction and stuff like that. But generally speaking, don't tell me what to do, how to do it, and we'll be just fine. Just, because I'm always going to, in my mind, I'm a hard worker. I'll research things accurately, understand them very accurately, apply concepts as seems to be best practice. And if I notice that someone else is of the same like mindset and methodology, or not even, it doesn't even have to be the same stuff. Like, as long as I notice that you are really on top of your game, I will respect the hell out of you. And you might be someone that I would work under. But if I notice any cracks and, distinct things that tell me that you are actually not 100% into this, that you're like, outdated, relying on shit that's, garbage, and you expect me to work for you, we're going to have a big problem. Like, I will be obstinate, defiant, extremely problematic. And I'm definitely not going to listen to you or your suggestions. And I'll make it very obvious that I'm not going to as well. So, it's not just that. Like, I would say that, like, I have that element of myself where it's like, if I lose respect for you, I lose all respect for you, and it's not going to be a good working environment. I'm also very stubborn, and, just like, I'm not a good employee. Like, I know that 100%. I'm a terrible employee. But if you're ready to go to war and you want to go to war with me, like, I'll put my head through the same windows and doors and walls with you, as long as I know you're 100% in. But I'm a pretty extreme person from that perspective. And a lot of the times academia is not like that, so it's just like, from a personality fit standpoint, I don't make a ton of sense working in higher ed. I just rubbed people the wrong way. They rubbed me the wrong way. It didn't really fit. And so it wasn't like, but I loved actually working with students. I loved the subject matter of exercise science and applied strength and conditioning related stuff. Um, I, in some ways, would prefer working in that world from a content perspective. I just don't know if I would ever make sense in the actual design of that world from the way that it's put together from a workplace perspective. But I left it and I came to New York. I had one of my former students who was, probably the best student I've ever had, Ethan Grossman. He came to New York to work for Peak Performance. And, when I was leaving Springfield, I got a call from him and he was like, "Hey, I don't know what you're up to next, but there's probably a really good opportunity here at Peak. This place is being funded by Google. The chairman of Google is the primary funder. This guy's got $10 billion. He's seems to be willing to just drop any amount of money on how it's going to be built out. Like, they're looking for a director of education and training methodology. You're going to work alongside these other superstar types of people that they were talking about bringing in for director of rehab and then internship coordinator and all that kind of stuff." And I was like, damn, that sounds like a hell of an opportunity. And I think it might have been, once you actually get to a place, you sort of see like, oh, this is a bit of a Monet painting. It looked really good from far, but now that I'm getting pretty close to it, it's pretty murky and blurry and kind of a nightmare. So, it wasn't ever going to work. Like it was kind of like if you gave a kid with like extreme ADD a Christmas list and they just like wrote down everything on the spur of the moment. Like that's kind of what the project actually kind of felt like in some ways. And it was like, this is not going to work. Like, so, it just, that's kind of what I came down here for. And it's just interesting whenever you find yourself in a place like I just made a life for myself down here. And we'll see. I mean, I'm a pretty open-minded person when it comes to like what kind of comes next, but things change. I've gotten older. I'm in my 40s now. I've got a 2-year-old son. Like, I don't have the same ability to just sort of like be like, all right, I'm moving to Australia. See everybody. I'm going to check out what they're doing down there because I feel like they're pretty cool and like really onto like a good fitness scene there. And of course you probably get there and it's the same problems that you didn't like everywhere else.
Yeah. Would you say that academia, well, I'm just curious, you're especially still giving out like, seminars and doing all this stuff. Like, what do you think is a better environment for educating people? Do you think it's this, like rethinking the big patterns and sort of what you're doing with these like paid mentorship sort of deals? Or do you still think that a classroom setting and going to university or college is a better setting for relaying information?
Well, I think that you got to have the right people. Okay. And I think that universities, for the most part, are not set up at this point in time to be teaching venues. They're research venues, most of them, the people that excel and that are reward, like there's very little reward for being a good teacher. You're probably, if you're just a good teacher, you're not going to be put on a tenure track. You're not going to get tenure. You're going to be out. It's not in your interest to be a good teacher as a college professor. It's in your interest to be a good researcher and to work on a lot of committees. That's how you get tenure. That's how you get promoted. You have to have tangible, because everything is tried to be measured and objective from the standards that they use to promote you and give you tenure. Okay, so how many things can you put on paper? Like, it's very hard to put on paper objective findings about how good of a teacher you are. You get the little bubble pencil test that students do in 5 seconds at the end of their final exam. And that's it. That's the only measurable that you have, which is bullshit. On the other hand, you have how many papers were you an author on? How much grant money did you bring in for studies and for collaborative projects? How many committees were you on working from, over the last 5 years? Those things are, it's publish or perish is the code word that you have in the university setting. That's how you move up in the ranks. That's also how you would become, famous inside the academic world, around the world. Like, who's the main researcher for this project? That's the guy I want to have a conversation with. You can make money that way too. Like, if you're able to get, not as much anymore. It used to be that, you could get a big grant and give yourself a salary or something like that, but you can't really do that as much anymore. But it's still how you would become recognized. It's still how you would be, ultimately entrenched in a place. Like, that's the primary job of a professor. And I think people, if you just know that, it's fine. But I feel like that's not as much put forward for other people outside academia to be aware of. And yeah, it's like, it's not a place where you're going for this person to be a great teacher for you. That's just not how it is. You're going there as a student to prove that you can jump through hoops for 4 years, because a lot of people can't, quite honestly. Can you just show up every day in a free-flowing and, kind of free-flowing environment? Still pretty structured. But, a lot of people can't show up for work. A lot of people aren't reliable. If you're able to graduate a 4-year institute, you're at least reliable on some level. Like, you're accountable on some level. It kind of vets that. And then it's also supposed to be something where you create a network of people that you have going forward in your professional life, which is incredibly important. So there's a lot of benefits that occur as a result of participating in a collegiate environment. And I think that if people just had that told to them ahead of time, they would be more understanding of the reality of it. But people have some kind of, I don't know, dead poet society image in their head of like, oh my God, this person's going to set me on fire in the classroom. And like, that's not how it works. That's not what it is. Maybe you have some weirdo professor that's actually like really into teaching, but they're not high school teacher part 2.0. They're like, creatures that don't even grade your papers. They're not interested in reading what your 19-year-old self has to say about this very basic subject. They have a teaching assistant who's going to read and grade those things and spit back a rubric report for you. Like, it's a chain of command hierarchy system that has nothing to do with, gigantic teaching prowess as an objective aim.
I wish someone told me that before I went to college. Definitely. Yeah. That made so much more sense, because I can't tell you how many times I would go through. I definitely had the dead poet society idea in my head where it's like, I'm going to just come out of here enlightened in some way. Right. And it's like, I finished my 4 years and I was like, all right, well, I know how to drink. Like, that's good. Like,
yep.
Pretty much it's what it came down to.
It's kind of a socialization testing process too. It's just a big vetting process. Mm-hmm. If you're not able to socialize on a semi-normal level, you probably won't make it through. But at the same time, if you're not accountable on some level of like, hey, this is the kid that like was out until 3 a.m. every night and just completely blackout drunk, you're probably not going to make it through. So it just sort of vets it. It's a normalcy vetting process. Like, is this someone that's probably going to be a fairly productive worker in some normal workforce environment?
Yeah, I got you.
Or is this a very odd person that is like socially isolated and unable to really have any kind of like interaction with other people in group environments on a normal level? Because if that's the case, that person's probably going to get pushed out.
Mm-hmm. What do you think is for those people that are pushed out, like, is there benefit to that? for them? Or is that more like, hey, are we creating a person that now has had a negative, even more of a negative connotation to these social environments?
Yeah, I think so. But then you just have to look at it like, it's almost, it doesn't matter. It's like there's still levels of tribalism that exist in normal human affairs they're self control. They control themselves. They govern themselves. They have a level of like their own autonomy that goes under the radar that people don't really notice too much, but that is the practice that we're engaging in. And it's kind of like from time immemorial, like forever, it's been a thing of like, that's what we've done as a species. We ostracize, and ostracism is like a form of almost death, previously. And nowadays it's pretty damn close to it as well. You become irrelevant when you're not included in the group in some ways. And unless you have there are some people that can crack that and do it all by themselves through just sheer force and will. And that's the outlier that, you have to be aware of on some level. Most of the time, the outlier is just ostracized and goes off into obscurity and is never heard from again. However, every now and then you can be ostracized, and a bit like Napoleon returning back from Elba, return in an even more dominant fashion than before.
Yeah. They overcome the situation to some degree.
Yep.
Yeah. So back to the question. I mean, do you feel like you can relay information better than in like, say, like your power hour or something versus like a lecture hall?
It's funny. I think that the specific answer to that question actually falls into the misconstrued research on learning styles, which people seem to go back to for decades. This notion that Howard Gardner put forward in the 1970s, I think, that there's kinesthetic learners and hands-on learners and visual learners and blah, 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 auditory learners. It's been so debunked for so long, and yet people cling to it as if it's actually a thing. It's not a thing. People are not hands-on learners or the actual type of specific information itself can be more conducive towards being visual or auditory or hands-on learning appropriate from a teaching style. But it's not the person. Like, human beings just have brains that have pattern recognition capabilities to them. And your ability to recognize abstract patterns and to create associations with previously known patterns is how fucking smart you are. And if you're unable to do that, you're dumb. And it's like some people are smarter than other people are and make faster, more profound, robust synthesis of novel information with previously known information. And, but from a pedagogical perspective, you have to recognize the appropriate medium to convey information. And it's also a degree of how familiar are the people in the audience with the information that is being presented. If there is a complete unfamiliar, if it's totally novel information for the audience, then it has to be dominated by the instructor in terms of the information coming across to people. If it's a new variation on a previously known concept, then there can be much more of an interactive kind of a exchange in terms of how the information is taught. But for the most part, it kind of comes down to those things. So it really does depend on what is the information. Am I trying to teach Olympic lifting exercises? If so, well, then I probably need to do a lot of hands-on instruction. I'm going to need to put PVC sticks in people's hands. I'm going to need to give them feedback in terms of where their body is in space. I'm going to need to have them practice the movements. Like that's appropriate for trying to teach people how to do Olympic lifts, it's important to have them physically do it. Like if I just get up in front with a PowerPoint and click through slides, that's a completely absurd approach to trying to teach that information. But if I'm trying to teach you the electron transport chain, well, then I probably need to lecture and discuss the theoretical perspectives. And I probably should have some pictures of, mitochondrial membranes so that you can have a sense of like, where is this? What does it look like? How many specific respiratory proteins am I talking about? Oh, okay, this is this sort of protein tunnel that has a haplotype associated with it. Blah, blah, blah. Like, it really kind of is very intertwined with the information as well as the existing knowledge base of the receiver.
Gotcha. Well, and that's you probably acting more as a teacher than a professor, I guess, in that sense, which would you agree with that?
I was more of a teacher than a researcher personally.
Yeah. Okay. I gotcha. So that makes sense. I mean, why you would go this direction. And, again, being in that academia where you're saying being a good teacher, you're not really rewarded for being a good teacher. So, and now you get paid for it. So, hey, there you go.
Right. Yeah.
It all comes down at the end. No, that's cool. I'd like to kind of pivot, if you don't mind, actually get into some training stuff and kind of talk about that. Because, I've participated or listened to a lot of your power hours and been a part of those. And I've definitely taken a good amount of information from that. I actually cite you in my new program and ebook quite a few times in terms of hypertrophy. So if you haven't checked out Pat's Power Hour, definitely you have to check it out. But I was curious your thoughts and just, you going through this process, because I believe you're in a bulk right now. Is that correct?
I finished it maybe 5-6 weeks ago now. Gotcha. But it was a 22 week long training block that started, first week of December and ended, I think somewhere late April or something like that.
Gotcha. Okay. Do you just go through these? Is it like consistently a 22 week, like, hey, I'm going to do a 22 week bulk and then I'm going to go into a 22 week cut sort of process that you do throughout a year, or how does that kind of look for you?
Yeah, well, I had the primary goal this year in the calendar year of 2022 of wanting to be over 200 pounds and under 10% body fat. Mm-hmm. So that's like last year in December, I was 194 pounds and 11.1% body fat on a DEXA. So, it was kind of like, well, that was a pretty good place for me to be from an aesthetic perspective, as well as a quantitative perspective with, typical strength and conditioning metrics. But I bet I could be way more impressive with all of those things if I was to get over 200 pounds and under 10% body fat. And it's close. Like, I think that if it's really focused work, that might be able to happen. It's challenging, but it's right on the edge of possible. And I don't want to do something unless it's right on the edge of possible. I don't want to know, there's no fun in betting on a 1 foot putt in golf, but like a 8-footer with a bank, now that's spicy. Okay, it might make this thing, but I don't know. This is going to really be challenging. So, I try to map these things out. So I mapped out what I felt would be an appropriate muscle gain, because you can't be over 200 pounds and under 10% body fat unless you gain a fairly significant amount of muscle mass if you're already 194 and 11% body fat. So, so I just kind of looked at it like I have an idea that if I go 22 weeks of mass gaining and then I go 4 weeks of maintenance following that. And then I go 20 weeks of fat loss. We're at 42 plus 46 weeks. And then that leaves 9 weeks after that to try to see where I'm at and calibrate from there to try to hit the goal numbers. And usually, if you're going to do any kind of aesthetic competition, bodybuilding, something like that, like you typically don't step on stage right at the end of a fat loss. Like you kind of go back into a bit of a reverse diet after that and kind of try not to gain any fat whatsoever, but like load some glycogen in and kind of fill in a little bit more. Because at the end of long fat loss period, you're going to be pretty depleted and flat looking, and it's not great. Like you'll look your best somewhere around 4 or 5 weeks after that fat loss period, as you've kind of like bumped your calories back up in the other direction to a degree.
Gotcha. Is that just due to like how you're holding water weight to some degree, or?
Yeah, I mean, water fills in muscles. It can look really good if it's timed appropriately. And I'm not a bodybuilder. I don't know all the specifics. Mm-hmm. I just, from a bigger picture population standpoint, like anybody that does a really good, solid fat loss period, and look, like it's never going to be like, overall, I think that people make this huge mistake of making their training phases way too short. They're like, yeah, I'm doing this 6-week muscle gain thing. It's like, well, you just wasted your time. 6 weeks is not enough time just biologically to be able to actually accomplish what you said. Like you're kind of taking us 2 steps forward and then 2 steps back. You're in the same place as you were before. Like it's going to take some dedicated time to be able to do this. But it's just, you're going to look very flat and sucked out and depleted in pure fat loss mode. Like you have to kind of toggle it back and like basically replete yourself after that, because you'll be depleted.
Yeah.
And depleted doesn't look great.
Yeah, you don't want to look sickly or
it just looks like a flat tire. You know what I mean? It's not best case.
Gotcha. So throughout that process of the bulk and, even like the fat loss phase, were you still I guess a question I have for you, because especially watching like Athletic Weapon and all of that, were you still running, sprints and doing all of this, like, plyometric work, things like that? Like, was that a key component of that?
Yeah. I mean, I still think that Charlie Francis's vertical integration model is kind of the best model overall for understanding program design and periodization concepts. And with that, it's like the step one is define and identify all of the relevant fitness qualities that are going to be in the development of the person that you're working with. And so when I think about that for myself and what goes into Athletic Weapon, there's, basically skeletal muscle from a hypertrophy and just a tissue perspective, mm-hmm. And then there is elasticity that would be essentially this kind of, relative stiffness relationship between skeletal muscle and tendon tissue. And then there's going to be just energy system related stuff. Primarily, I'm usually thinking about the aerobic system. The aerobic system has to be held at some level from both a repeat ability to be able to just accumulate training volume, as well as to be able to, during recovery periods, have you shift over to a parasympathetic state, have a low resting heart rate. From a health perspective, it's kind of a bedrock piece. And so to me, those are like, in my mind, kind of the big three. Sure, we could get into other things, rotational power, rate of force development with heavy ballistics, with Olympic lifts. But, I feel as though a lot of those things come out in the wash to a certain degree, so long as the muscle tissue is accounted for, from a, just what's going to build it or hold it at a certain level of cross-sectional area. And as long as elasticity is held onto from the perspective of like how much of a stretch shortening cycle am I getting through, some kind of muscle spindle response through tendons being stretched and shortened. And then, like I said, energy system wise, like aerobic system is really like the big rock that I'm thinking about. Gotcha. So across the year, I always have to do something. Like there's a question of, am I in a training block where I'm going to focus on one of those three elements? And usually the answer is yes, but sometimes no. Sometimes I'm literally just in a maintenance block, like, hey, I always try to name the block something that's, like it's called athletic weapon. Most of the blocks have been named after weapons of some kind. There was the katana was the sprint block from last summer. Big gun was the first block of any of them. I like a lot of them are song inspired as well, like Big Gun's an AC/DC song. There was, Gun in Your Mouth by La Coca Nostra, Bullet in Your Head by Rage Against the Machine. Those were the first three blocks. I just felt like they were kind of sequencing. Like you can't have a bullet in your head unless you've got a big gun and then that thing's in your mouth. So they kind of transition together. And so I just try to look at it from the perspective of like, from a sequential perspective and from like, so anyways, like all of those three relevant domains of fitness quality that I think are big umbrellas that a lot of other subtypes of fitness fall under. I have to either be developing one of those or and then maintaining the other ones. So I kind of play the shell game with this, you know what I mean? Like if I'm developing muscular fitness and tissue, then I'm going to maintain elasticity and aerobic fitness. If I'm going to develop elasticity, I have to maintain muscular fitness and aerobic fitness. If I'm going to develop aerobic fitness, I have to maintain elasticity. And so it's always like, well, if I'm developing one of those qualities, then I push the volume into the landmarks that fall between minimum effective volume and maximum recoverable volume. If I'm maintaining the other qualities, I try to train them at volume that would be maintenance volume. Now, the question is always to me like, well, what is maintenance volume and what is minimum effective to maximum recoverable volume? And knowing like that's a starting question, but those are all sliding scales. They don't stay the same. It depends on what you're doing with your nutrition. If I'm in a block and I'm saying, hey, I want to build muscle mass. Okay. That means I have to train between minimum effective volume and maximum recoverable volume with resistance training. It's never going to work unless I do that. But if I'm eating in maintenance calories, then minimum effective volume is, first of all, it doesn't even make sense. It's just the stupidest thing in the world to try to train to build muscle tissue when you're at maintenance calories. It doesn't work. It's like trying to put out a fire with, I don't know, like, I don't even have the right analogy. Like you wouldn't be using water to put out the fire. You're like, well, I've got this bag of Cheetos. It's like, well, it has nothing to do. There's no way that could work. Well, you could just throw Cheetos at the fire. Yeah. All right. It's not going to make it better. It's not going to make it worse. It's just you're wasting your time. This is an irrelevant practice at this point. So it's kind of like if you're going to, like, if I'm at maintenance calories, then I should train muscle tissue at maintenance volume because I'm not providing substrate to grow tissue. I need to be in a hypercaloric diet to grow tissue. And the nice thing about being in a hypercaloric diet is it actually makes minimum effective volume slide lower. it brings the amount of volume that's minimum effective closer to maintenance volume. And it actually pushes maximum recoverable volume away. So it causes a beautiful slide of those variables. I can actually do very little and grow tissue if I'm in a hypercaloric diet. And I have this giant runway to just increase volume over time through a progressive overload program design. If I'm in a calorie deficit, and then I start to look at where are these variables, maintenance volume actually starts running up and away, and I have to do more to just hold on to what I already had previously. Minimum effective volume is also running away, but the problem is that maximum recoverable volume is coming towards you. So it's kind of like your targets are harder to hit, but the thing that is the end point is getting closer to you and easier to hit. So you have to thread the needle and kind of be like Indiana Jones, like sliding between two walls closing in on you or something like that. So I try to, in the program, explain a lot of these things. Like, look, like we are in this kind of a block right now. We are in a speed development block. And that means that the primary stuff that we're going to be focusing on is elasticity. And simultaneous to that, we're going to be in a caloric deficit because, number one, like I want to take some of the stress off your joints while you're doing this. Number two, the old track saying is fat don't fly. Like if you're going to run fast, you need to be lean. You're not going to find anybody that's super fast that's really fat. Like it's just, it's not in your best interest. And from the perspective of, see, this is a question I don't have an answer. It's very easy if we're just talking hypertrophy and muscle tissue. I don't know what's happening to volume landmarks. Volume landmarks have to apply outside of just hypertrophy. They apply to everything, but they're probably different for different fitness types. If you're actually going to, like, if you're thinking about that which drives protein synthesis and muscle acquisition, it's going to be the mTOR pathway physiologically. If you're going to think about what drives biogenesis of mitochondria, it's going to be the AKT pathway. And those things are somewhat oppositional to each other. And the AKT pathway can be stimulated by a hypocaloric diet. So it's probably a situation where if you're going to build aerobic fitness, you probably, for most people, I'm not talking about elite endurance athletes, they're probably in a different ballpark. But if you lose weight, it's probably going to promote aerobic adaptations. And so you probably need to be in a deficit to really have all of the autophagy processes going, the mitochondrial biogenesis stuff going, to make yourself actually more efficient and have less weight that you have to carry around and move through space. Those are all beneficial elements towards promoting an increase in that fitness type, which would mean that you also need to have some kind of a developmental level of volume that would be between minimum effective and maximum recoverable. So it's, to me, like those are the things that really get me excited about thinking about programming and the interplay of variables. And, it's like I just picture like there's all these Venn diagrams that are kind of overlapping with each other that are sliding relative to each other. Like that which is going to make you more aerobically fit is probably going to make it more challenging to maintain muscle mass. So I can almost picture like minimum effective or maintenance volume for muscle tissue running away as minimum effective volume for aerobic fitness is coming towards you. And it's like, oh, that's an interesting kind of a phenomenon that you'd have to really logistically account for and really try to like figure out how to slide all these dials appropriately to actually solve for.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. But where do you think, so two questions actually. One's a little woo-woo, the other one's a bit more scientific. We'll start with the scientific one. where do you think genetics falls into all this? Like, do you really think it matters all that much, or are we just pretty
Oh
much a
yeah.
blueprint? Like,
Oh no. Your genetics is probably the single most important determining factor of everything.
well,
I mean,
I guess for that, like, how do we utilize that to our advantage, or can we even in a program?
no, it is what it is. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, some people are going to have like more robust, larger, easier responses to training than others will. You
Mm-hmm.
know, some people should probably be on a chess team. Other people should probably like, really drive the weight room forward. I think that, look, like I think you have to recognize where your strengths are in life and go after those strengths and have them take you as far as they can possibly go. You're, I mean, maybe there's some people that are just moderate, and that's their strength. But, if you identify that, like, wow, I'm really fucking good at this particular thing, you need to ride that thing as far as you possibly can. Because you're not going to have that many strengths, most likely. So I do love Bill Hartman's ideas on, body archetypes and
Right.
having, and like people misconstrue this so badly. He's like you're never going to meet anyone that is the wide narrow or the narrow wide. It's like everyone's a mishmash in between. It's just you're probably going to trend in one direction or the other. And it's like, if you are extremely towards one of these archetypes, you probably do have a superpower, And if you do have that superpower, well, don't try to do something that doesn't make sense for that as your primary training focus. You'd be so much better off, doing what seems to come natural to you. Like if I see somebody and they have the wrist circumference of like a pencil, I'm probably not going to make this person try to become an elite weightlifter. It's like
Mm-hmm.
this person's bones just aren't going to handle it. But if they have massive elbows and knees and wrists and ankles from just an anthropometric standpoint, like this person's built to just train and lift weights and get ridiculously strong. And if you have some of these basic measurements, or if you just have a set of eyes that can look at what's in front of you and not be too emotionally biased towards some sort of a preconceived notion of this is what all humans need to do and focus on, then I think that you can help someone. But it's like, I don't know, if I get somebody that's built like a supermodel, again, they're probably going to be really terrible at lifting weights. So they're probably going to be much better at, doing large range of motion excursions and potentially some aerobic kinds of things. And I don't know, guess what? People like to do what they're good at.
Yeah.
Flexible people love to go to yoga class, and strong people love to lift weights. And so long as you're consistent and adherent with a physical activity practice, number one, you'll probably receive health benefits for life. And number two, if you really care about competing or driving yourself towards elite performance, you better pick the thing that you're suited for.
Yeah, totally. No, that makes sense. I completely agree on the, people they naturally gravitate toward what they're good at. I've had this conversation with a couple other folks in which I was like, you could have a narrow who wants to be an elite power lifter, but they probably don't, they have to go through so much of almost like hazing to even get to the point where they can compete relatively well. Whereas a wide, they're just naturally gifted. They probably figured it out at a younger age. So not only do they have a structure that's built around it, but they probably have more time on the narrow because they discovered it a lot sooner than the narrow did. Mm-hmm. So it's, people just do what they're good at naturally. It's just let them do it.
Right. Yeah. It's it's a pretty simple dopamine response. You know what I mean?
Right.
When you get a dopamine hit, you usually keep doing that thing.
Exactly. So going back to your experience with the bulk and the cut and everything that you've been doing, do you think there's anything to, there's these folks out here that talk about, timing like a bulk with certain parts of the seasons, right? Or like something do you think that there's any merit to that, or is that something?
No, I think it's just logistics and like, I'm in the Northeast. It's cold in the winter. There's like one indoor track that I found in the New York City, New Jersey, Long Island area. And it's in like a really shitty part of New York City that I don't want to have to go to. That's not close to where I live. And then it would just ruin my train. Like it would be so difficult from a commute perspective to get to this thing. And, I still ran outside all winter, I did it once a week. It was Mondays because it was like, I'm going to do maintenance volume elastic work during the winter. And I'm going to focus on muscle development during the winter. And it just kind of makes sense because, well, I don't want to have to cancel training sessions because of snow or rain or wind or whatever other things. So as long as it's only once a week, it's probably pretty manageable. And I have like a backup plan in case it's completely impossible to train outside on this one day a week, which will be running inside on a true form self-propelled treadmill. But I don't really want to do that because even if you say it's pretty close, it ain't that close. It doesn't compare to putting spikes on and running on a Mondo surface. Like It's a significant downshift. So, I think that it usually comes down more to that. Like if I lived somewhere that was like fairly weather stable throughout the year, no, I wouldn't. I would give zero shits about that kind of a thing. And, I would probably see myself doing more outdoor work year round. But I've lived in the Northeast my entire life, and I'm 4 decades in at this point. So I've gotten used to seasons, and it's probably as subconscious as much as anything of just logistically having to work around these damn things because I don't live in Arizona where it's more stable and I could just literally have like a much more, it'd just be so much easier, like I was always jealous of the kids that grew up in California and Florida when I was a kid playing baseball. I was like, no wonder you guys are better than me. You get to play all year,
all the time, right? Like they don't
I'd love to be on. Yeah. I was in high school. I'd practice out in the wintertime outdoors, I found a softball field that was out in like the woods nobody went to. And I would just, bang the ball off of the concrete dugout wall that was level with field level. And that way I could just field a million ground balls and, throw the ball a million times over the course of a winter. And I put a tee out there and I just, hit the ball to all fields. I just practice going around the field from opposite field over to pull side. And then I'd collect the balls and I'd put trash cans at the bases. And I'd just try to throw the ball into the trash can from right field, center field, left field.
You do that in the snow?
It didn't snow so much on Cape Cod. It was a bit of a microclimate that kind of prevented that in some ways. But I did not do that in the snow, but I did run in the snow as a kid. I'd put just boots on and just try to picture I was Rocky out in Russia.
Hey, that'll hype anyone up, get you through the weather with that one.
Until you're like 40 minutes into that run, and you're like 40 minutes away from home, and you're fucking shitty 1990s boots that weren't particularly waterproof or wet to the feet.
Falling apart. Oh man, yeah, that would be nasty. I can't imagine. Well, I mean, we ran cross country. I ran cross country and track back in school, and I mean, we would run in the wintertime, but I mean, we would go like shirtless. It's just what we did. It's like, all right, like, now I think about it, I'm like, that would suck, but we just went for it. Like, who cares?
That's it, man. I watch my son, he's 2, and all these other kids at the playground, and they got the city turns water on, it like mists you but it's freezing. You know what I mean? It's just like cold tap water on coldest. It's because they're not going to pay for like to heat the water. No. And like every adult is like, oh my God, that water is frigid. Meanwhile, all these kids are like pulling all their clothes off, running right into it. Like they are absolute savages. We just get like completely soft as we get older with temperature related things.
Seriously. Yeah. Air conditioning. It's great, but it's also, I think it definitely takes away some of our, I don't know what the word is, like robustness to some degree.
Yeah. Just like hormetic responses are reduced. I will say, like, if you're trying to train specifically to really maximize development of something, you probably want to reduce your hormetic responses throughout life as much as you possibly can, so that you're not wasting any energy except towards adapting that one specific quality. It's almost like, I think about it like when you get farmers that are trying to grow heifers for maximum beef productivity, like those things, they try to make them live in like climate neutral environments. They don't walk very far to get grass. It's like, you're going to take drugs and you're going to eat and you're going to have very low stress. And if I was to think about what is almost optimal for an athlete, like that's pretty much it. Like as routine a day as possible. Like every day is basically the same. Everything is predictable. There's almost no stress. Everything that is stress is directed towards this one thing of your sport performance. And yeah, like that's basically it. It might be Groundhog Day and boring, but it's very low stress.
Right. I think people get, again, they attach this emotional idea to like some primal caveman that was like this most resilient, chiseled thing, and it can do all the things, but it's like, that's not necessarily how it works. I'm always curious what that person, that human actually looked like, back in the day. Like, were they actually like some Hercules looking guy, or were they,
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I do know that like, forensics started with anthropology. That's the field that it came from. So they have pretty decent data on some of the physical characteristics of, Paleolithic ancestors. And like the things that we do know is that Western society has just now caught up with average height of Paleolithic ancestors, but not everywhere. There's like pygmy tribes and stuff like that on islands and other things. So it for the most part, when you think of like African and European and like Central Indo-Valley like hominids, they were taller than most humans alive on the planet today. And like Western European Americans are actually still shorter than the average height of Paleolithic ancestors. But like from a bone density perspective, they had really good bone density, not as great as farmers during the Neolithic Revolution. So farmers became probably more robust from a muscular development standpoint, but then the dentistry fell apart on farmers compared to Paleolithic ancestors. Paleolithics had perfect dentistry. When you see all their skulls, like they have perfect, like they have really well-shaped skulls and perfect tooth placement and like straight as an arrow teeth. And they had no cavities. All of a sudden you start to see with farmers that they also had pretty damn good teeth in terms of space and straightness, but they had cavities due to a lack of nutritional variability. They were which makes sense. They were growing one crop and eating mostly that thing. So they didn't have the full profile of nutrients that a Paleolithic wanderer, hunter-gatherer would have from a more diverse nutrient selection. But like Paleolithic hunter-gatherers would not have been particularly muscular. They would have been, very good movers though, for sure. And I think they certainly would have been physically very impressive from like what they would have been able to do. I mean, you got to think like they're wild animals.
Yeah,
You
for
know?
sure.
It's a wild human. Like that's going to be something that is
Well,
a lot to deal with. Yeah.
compare a wolf to a dog. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, you know who's going to win that fight every time.
Right. Yeah.
So,
You know, and like I don't know if you have kids, but like you watch kids move and the wiggliness of them is incredible. You know, they're really strong. Like my son's 2, and like, you know, when he doesn't want to cooperate or do something, he's so wiggly and like difficult to corral, like through the axial skeleton. And it's like, well, I can't do any of that shit. And
yeah.
you know, it's almost like it gets bred, or it doesn't get bred, it gets lost along the way because we just sit in chairs, we lock ourselves up, we don't do all that axial wiggling. And, you know, I think that we have proxies to it. Like, hey, if you do wrestling and martial arts and gymnastics, maybe a lot of those things still are very rigid versus all damn day, every day you're out in the wild and you're having to bend and twist and gather and move and drag. And like, it's going to be a different kind of a lifestyle.
That wiggliness, it's almost as though, I mean, imagine being like trapped under a car or something like that. Like how you try to get out and away. Like it might be lost just because we're not in those situations very often anymore.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's interesting. Well, Pat, I know we're getting close on time. I do have another quick question for you, if you don't mind. Yeah. So just kind of getting to your nutrition when it came to, you know, the bulking aspect. This is a little bit of a personal question, but I have had a number of clients struggle with this. But have you ever encountered the situation where you know you have to eat the food, you've got it all planned out, but you almost work so hard that you're not hungry?
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you just look at that food and you say, I gotta be a machine and just eat this and just do it?
Yeah.
Or that's your plan. That's what you do.
Yeah. I spent 20 plus straight weeks, every single meal. I wasn't hungry for over 20 weeks. Wake up in the morning, not hungry. Fuck. Like, I don't want to eat this. Like, next meal. Like, just sitting there staring at this food, like, oh my God. But it's like, well, I'm going to eat it because I said I was going to do it, you know?
Yeah.
And you just force yourself to eat it.
Yeah. Would you take a while?
What's that?
Would you take a while would you kind of like milk a meal?
Some of those meals. Yeah. And then you find yourself running right into the next meal.
Yeah.
And it's
that's the worst.
So to me, it's like, you know, there's like the whole the palatability hypothesis of like, you know, nutrient, or like, it's just like, why are people getting obese? And it's like the palatability hypothesis probably explains it more than anything. You know, I just tried to eat the most palatable foods possible. If it was not palatable, it would be like, I can't even fucking eat this. Like, I'm sorry, but I got to like throw this in the garbage. I'm going to have a bowl of Cinnamon Toast Crunch. And, but like, I could not physically get myself to eat it sometimes.
Do you think that's a self-regulator of sorts? Like your body's just like trying to not develop 100%. The muscle? Yeah.
Nobody, like human bodies don't want to deviate from wherever it normally settles. You know, it's like the dynamic systems theory graph where you've got these wells. You know, it's kind of like we tend to all exist in some kind of a well, and it's like a marble rolling around inside that well. And sometimes people like invest more effort. Oh, I'm going to really try and I'm going to break through it. It's like, no, you're probably going to roll a little bit towards the upper echelon of the well. And then you're not going to do it for long enough or hard enough, and you're going to settle back in. You're going to be the same a year from now as you are today, because you're never going to leave your well. Because it takes a horrendous level of effort and diligence and doing something different from what you normally do to get out of that well and then to ascend past that. And it's not like I was having this conversation yesterday with Ethan, actually, like There is no next well. Okay. It's not like you go out of this well and there's this pre-existing well up here. No, no, no. You have to climb. And then this is the point of maintenance in my mind. You stay at this point, and if you're at that point long enough, your little marble rolls around and it digs its own well. Okay. And now you can exist at kind of a homeostatic new set point, but you have to spend time in this new place so that you actually create it as like a new normal. And then most people, that's kind of like, I think that all these plateaus and other things, it's like, it's your body not wanting to go further, you know?
Yeah.
And if you are hitting a plateau, it's just diminishing returns. Just stay there for a little while, you know, just literally maintain that quality in this new well. And then at some point after it's kind of like found a comfort place there, and it's probably not going to, you know, roll back down the other way. Now, with recovery and fatigue management and everything else, if you were able to maintain it, now that you've got this new level of energy reserves, go ahead and blast through it and try to go up again. But, you know, the process of getting out of the well and going somewhere new is one that most people will not go through, because it's going to make you incredibly uncomfortable. You're going to have a million alarm bells going off and voices in your head that are going to tell you it's a bad idea. Don't do it. Stop. It's blah, 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 blah. And you literally, it's the whole thing is just to continue to say, shut the fuck up and do it, and just fucking do it. Like, you don't have a choice. It's like, I just picture this, like, you know, this is like, it's a combo of like, there's a gun to my head, and if I don't do it, somebody's going to pull the trigger, or that, you know, this is my job. Yeah. This is my job. And if I don't do my job, I'm going to get fired. And then if I get fired, I'm going to be homeless. And if I'm homeless, I'm not going to eat. My family's not going to eat. Nobody's going to eat. And so there is no choice. But I'm a little crazy.
Hey, I mean, it gets you results. So it can't be too crazy.
Yeah, but I do think like most people aren't like that. So most people don't get results.
Mm-hmm.
Because as soon as there's like a confrontation, they'll shrink back from it.
Yeah.
Rather than just like, okay, I don't like how this feels, but I'm going to deal with it. And I'm not only going to deal with it, I'm going to exist in this state until I like this state.
Yeah. That's definitely it's being comfortable with being uncomfortable. That's a tough thing to get past for a lot of people. I mean, hell, we're talking about air conditioning and all of that. And like, that's a prime example. So
it's a fatigue thing too. I really do think it's fatigue. Like, I think most things get explained by fatigue. How long can you stay this way? You know, it's because anybody can do it for, you know, a short period of time. But a short period, it's like time under the curve is really what matters. Like, can you stay this uncomfortable for 20 weeks, 30 weeks, you know, 5 years? If you can't, that's fine. It's just that you have to accept that, like, you're not going to change.
Right.
Even from the picture of evolution, like, animals don't change, plants don't change unless there's a significant environmental stressor imposed upon them for an extended period of time. And that will drive, like, your epigenetic processes that can get down to the level of gamete and then change the expression that's presented in the offspring. So it's got to be a significant magnitude stress and a long imposition of that stress.
Do you think that what you just went through these past like 22 weeks and like putting on mass is changing epigenetics?
You know, I think that probably not 22 weeks, but the classic example that's always brought up in every genetic based book is the Dutch hunger winter.
Right.
During World War II. And that was I think like a 2 or 3 year period where the people in Holland A lot of them on average were subsisting off of like 400 calories a day. And it was like turnip roots and fucking tree bark and stuff like that. And, for the rest of their lives, they had high blood pressure and metabolic abnormalities and tended towards excessive weight gain in the aftermath. And then their children all showed the same things. And now that it's been long enough since World War II, we can see that their grandchildren are also, expressing that too. So, it's like, I don't think that any of the training I've ever done compares to the stress of multiple years of eating 400 calories a day. Like that is incredible levels of stress. But from a perspective of like magnitude and duration, I've been lifting weights since 1994. That's a long time. I would imagine that in some way, shape, or form, that level of stress response has probably migrated pretty deep into the cells of my body. And I would imagine probably reached a level of like gamete by now.
Yeah. Has to at some level.
I would think so. Yeah.
That's interesting. So my experience with some of this stuff is I did 2 years of functional patterns, and that was stupid. But that said, they talk about all kinds of stuff like that. It's like, oh, well, if you weight lift, you're then going to set your kids up for failure. Essentially, they're not going to be able to rotate and all this shit. And it's like, come on, man. Like, I don't know how much that really actually matters to some degree, but I mean, that's a whole nother topic of conversation.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting. I do think that, I think that we usually stop the discussion on change, like morphological change is accepted at the level of muscle. Mm-hmm. Pennate angle is known to change. Obviously, cross-sectional area can change. But morphological change does seem to present itself in terms of the overall shape of the skeleton. I don't even know if there's terminology that would be the equivalent of pennate angle as it applies to like your thorax. Yeah. There's no data on this. There's just observational level stuff, which is always like dangerous to make gigantic statements about. Like, yeah, nobody, you look really stupid after the fact. But I think it's fine to like suggest the idea that there's morphological change of, the ratios of the angles of the bones. I think that from an infrasternal angle perspective, maybe it does change over time as a result of imposed stress. But like to make that next, like you just have to be very careful and, skeptical about any beliefs that you have, because when you try to like promote those ideas, you can create a really like nociceptive response in the receiver. And then like, I'd rather people just exercise and try and train hard and in whatever they're good at and continue to do that, so long as like they're getting good results that are quantifiable. Like there's just so much to like, I don't know, like if you take yourself that seriously that you're, like this prognosticator of other people's children's future based on what you think you know about exercise, that's the level of hubris that's really dangerous.
Yeah. People just need to have positive experiences around movement nowadays. Like that's bare minimum. So no, I'm with you. I think that's a good way to sign off there. That was great. I like that a lot. So, well, Pat, thank you so much for coming on the show, man. How about you hit us with your social media stuff, any products, all that good stuff?
Sure. My Instagram is at Dr. Pat Davidson. It's Dr. Pat Davidson. And, I think everything's in the bio link there that I have as products. And I generally have like two branches of products. There's training products, and the big hitter there is Athletic Weapon. But I have some other books that I've done from the past, Mass 2. And then there's the educational side of things. And with that, there's the Rethinking the Big Patterns certification seminar series. There's the book that corresponds with that as well, Coach's Guide to Optimizing Movement. And then I have the Power Hour, which is I record that once a week. It's an hour-long educational episode, and I've been doing those for going on 5 years this fall. So when you sign up for it, you get access to all 4.5 years worth of those things, and topics have ranged all over the place. So yeah, those are the big ones. There's probably some other pieces to it as well. I always forget the stuff I actually have at this point in time.
It's all in the bio.
It's a link in bio. Yeah.
Yeah. It's all there. It's all there. Cool. Well, thanks, Pat. And thank you all for listening. And we'll see you all in the next one.